Hello, everyone. I'm Denny Miller, and welcome again to Indy 500 Yesteryear and Today with Speedway Insiders Paul Page, Bob Gates.
Hi.
And we have a special guest today, the distinguished Hollywood auto racing director. I'm going to introduce him. Normally we let that do, but Nate Adams of Chassis Media, and he has created just two outstanding documentaries that we're going to be talking about today. The one called Uppity about Willie T Ribbs, and also the documentary Winning about Paul Newman and his racing career. So thanks for coming, Nate. And why don't you,
thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. For our viewers who may not be that familiar with you, tell us a little about your stuff and your life and how you got involved with Chassis Media.
Sure. So I've always, I started out producing and directing documentaries and films. I've been a screenwriter. Probably almost a decade ago, I produced a movie with the guy that's been my partner for the last 10 years, Adam Carolla. And we, while we were doing that film, it was a feature film about life on the road for a stand-up comedian called Road Hard. I learned about Adam's love for cars and particularly his love for Paul Newman race cars. And he said, I'm really interested in doing this documentary on Paul Newman and his racing career. And I was like, Paul Newman raced cars? Which tells you how much I knew about racing. So he said, look at all this stuff that I have, this footage, and kind of, start doing some research and tell me if you think there's a documentary there. Because I asked my friend at ESPN, who does the 30 for 30s, if there was enough stuff there. And he said, no, there wasn't even enough information to do a 30 for 30. And I started looking at all of the material and doing research of my own. And then I realized that Newman had raced for 35 years and won his last race at 82 and owned an Indy team. And, that he was so immersed in racing. And I was like, wow, there's easily enough material for a documentary here. So Adam said, let's do it. And we started making it, and we made it, and we released it, and people loved it. And then during the process of making that film, we met and interviewed a gentleman named Willie T Ribbs. And Willie, I went to his ranch outside of Austin and interviewed him. And I came back and I said, Adam, we have to do a documentary on this guy because he's so we did that. We did another documentary that became the movie Ford versus Ferrari called The 24-Hour War. And another one about a gentleman named Carroll Shelby called Shelby American. So those were the 4 automotive ones we've completed as of now.
I believe I've seen all 4 of those.
I know. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, very good.
Great. Well, thanks.
And tell people how they could get one or more of the DVDs / Blu-rays if they want.
If you want to take a look at them, you can just go to chassis.com, CHASSY.com. And you can order them. And we've got, the Ford versus Ferrari, the Shelby doc, and the 24-Hour War. We made a 2-pack out of those because they're a lot of similarity in those stories, but different, but yeah, those two kind of go together like the movie.
Well, I ordered both of them, not the one on Ribbs and Newman, and they're excellent, just fantastic. For the hardcore racing fan, it's outstanding as well, as I think both of you would agree with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we have a lot more other racing docs on there as DVDs and stuff too. So if there's other racing stuff you like, there's some.
I think I saw most of them, not all of them, on Prime or Netflix, one or the other. Yeah. So that's a pretty big deal too. I would think.
We got a deal on Netflix. So they just went off. Yeah. We had Uppity, Shelby American, and the 24-Hour War all on Netflix for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there trade
I'm-
secrets how you can share with us how you get on Netflix? I don't really even know how a feature would get on Netflix.
So we, I have a background in distribution as well. So I had relationships at most of the streamers. So I gave it directly to Netflix and they licensed it from me. To get they have some automotive content on there, and I think they've realized that automotive content does fairly well with Drive to Survive. That's probably the biggest series. It's Formula One, which is different, but it's a gigantic series that they spend millions and millions of dollars on, and they've realized how popular it is. And it's made Formula One popular in America. It's the only thing that made it popular in America.
Yep.
Nate, if you, as you said, you really weren't into auto racing until you started working on the Newman film, is that correct?
Yeah.
So now you're exposed to auto racing and its people. How did you find them? What was your reaction to the racing community?
I've always made a lot of sports documentaries, and it's really fascinating to me. I was fortunate enough to interview, like we went to Goodwood and Adam raced there, and we got to, I interviewed John Certis and Jack Sears and Jackie Oliver and a lot of these guys. I had conversations with Jackie Stewart, but I didn't interview him while we were there. And I've been fortunate enough to interview, Mario multiple times and Michael, and spend time with them, like hanging out, not just interviewing, but and I mean AJ Foyt and a lot of different people. Like my friend who's one of the guys that works for me has been to every Indy 500 since 1991. He's always like, they're just people to me, but to him they're like bigger than life. So to me, they're to answer it quicker, I guess. I find it like Dan. We spent a lot of time with Dan Gurney. I find it fascinating that these guys, they don't have egos really. They're very down to earth guys. I did a lot of documentaries in the MMA space, so I know a lot of the best fighters that have ever lived on the planet. And when you're around these guys, you think, oh, these guys are going to be tough guys. You wouldn't even know like how really tough they are, because they don't ever have to tell you how tough they are. It's like none of these guys are ever going to tell you what a good driver they are, because they already know. I mean, I really enjoyed Bob Bondurant before, and I know that he passed away, but Bob took me for my one and only hot lap that I ever let anyone drive me in, and I'm never gonna ever let anyone catch me again, because I thought we were gonna die for sure.
Did he take you in the van or?
No, GT40.
Oh man,
GT40
I'm envious.
with an original motor that's right-hand drive, and he took me on his track, and I thought 100% that we were gonna die. Driving around because he was like 80 something, and they had to help him in the car, but once he got in the car it was as if he was 20 years old. I mean, he had he drove, and they said no, Bob's still faster than everybody here, like on this track. I was like, oh, you should have told me that before I got in the car. But I was amazed, the things like learning about these guys and all the research, that I think there's a universal ability of being calm in a situation that most people would be extremely panicked during. Like, when I'm talking to most of the guys I would talk to about their crashes and when they wrecked, and guys like Brian Redmond, who'd been in multiple fires. And I was like, Brian, and then they tell you about the wreck, and they describe it to you in unbelievable detail. Like I think for a lot of those guys, when they're racing, everything sort of slows down, and they can move better than most people, which is why they're the best in the world at what they do. They have better reflexes, and their peripheral vision is really, that's another thing I noticed seemed to be very good with them. But when they would describe the wrecks and what was going on and when the fire was starting, or how, the detail and the, their abilities were, it was incredible. It's incredible to hear, and then when you talk to a guy like AJ Foyt, who, you guys know, he's done incredible things that no one is ever going to do again. You don't win the Indy 500 and then go to Le Mans and win Le Mans in 10 days later. That's never going to happen again. And it's just never going to happen again. And, just do the things that those guys did. And he doesn't, if you try to get him to say it, like you're a great driver, tell me how good he won't say it. He doesn't want to say it. He's just like, well, I just always knew how to drive. That's, that's interesting for me as sort of a layman to hear. Same with Mario. Like, I knew everything about his background when I went to interview him, and, the dirt tracks and the stories with his brother, and what an incredible driver he was in Can-Am cars and, in almost any kind of car. And they just, to them, it's not a big deal, but to normal people, it's like they have a superpower.
Well, they may have. A number of years ago, some research was done on the racing driver, his peripheral vision that you just mentioned. Yeah, most of them have extraordinary peripheral vision, but they also put them under stress with the reaction deal. I don't know. It was far more complicated than going from the throttle to the brake. You see a combination of lights and then you push the button, that kind of thing. And they found out that they were actually better under stress. The reaction times increased under stress. So they are very special people.
Yeah, I don't, when you watch them race, and see what they're able to do in the amount of time, with less than a second, and, their abilities under fire, if you will, it's, and when they describe wrecks of coming around a corner, around a blind corner, over a hill, to see a fire and cars in front of them and understand, to process a decision in a millisecond and understand how to save their own life. Like it's, and the other driver that they're not going to hit, it's really extraordinary. And, like when I, like John Certis is someone who I always remember because I got to spend time with him, and, he was like a 9-time world motorcycle champion before racing in Formula One and becoming a world champion there. And he's this like your sweet grandpa, like he's an old man. That there has to be aggression in there somewhere for him to be as successful as he was, because you can't win, on motorcycles and in Formula One without that gene. And,
there's got to be a special motivation there, something that they want to excel above everyone else. And one time at Indy, Gil de Ferran and Elio Castroneves were teammates. And, Elio is just off the map, off the chain and over the top and exuberant. And Gil just really the opposite. But I asked Gil, what about that fire? He said, yeah, I have that fire inside, just like Elio does. I might not demonstrate with it, but I have that burning desire to achieve and to win, just like Elio does. So different personalities, but that one thing I think that makes all race car driver, or the great race car drivers great, is that burning desire to achieve, to prove themselves.
Rick Mears might be an example there too. He's kind of a mild-mannered Clark Kent kind of guy, and may not even approach Clark Kent, and I mean he's below that. But and I've talked to him about it, And he says that when he got into a race car, he could be a whole different person. He could now be aggressive and go after it and everything. So there are two different personalities at play there. Right? And that's true in a lot of race drivers.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah, I would definitely believe it about, the English drivers that I interviewed. They were all such sweet guys and so calm. Same with, the guys here. They're not overtly aggressive in personality. The ones that I met that were very, and I really like, if usually, I guess if I'm interviewing you, you probably have accomplished quite a bit.
So, go ahead.
Did you work directly with Paul Newman on that documentary? Nate, did you spend some time with Paul? I was just curious about his thoughts as we talk about that motivation.
Yeah.
I've heard him say, I've heard others say about him that if he'd have discovered auto racing before acting, he would have probably been a race car driver. I just wondered if he expressed any of that to you. Or
So I never met Paul Newman. He'd passed away before we did that film.
I see.
And his brother Arthur was in the film, and the best review I certainly got for that film was when we finished it. We brought Arthur and his wife Patty here, and they screened it with one of Paul's lifelong friends, and they were all in tears when it was over. And Arthur was like, "Wow, you got my brother. You really got him. That's him." That was probably the best review we could have gotten. And, everyone who I know who has seen the film, who knew Paul well, Sebastian Bourdais we screened it at Indy, and I had a couple of screenings of it, and he came twice, even though he was racing, but he was like, "I just love this movie. I love what you guys did." And I think he and Paul had a really great relationship, and he really enjoyed it. So Adam Carollo is my partner. He did most of the interviews in that film because originally we filmed both of them. So we filmed him talking to the people, Sebastian and Graham. And I really like Sebastian. He's another guy who he's like, you would not expect him to be a race car driver.
Right.
He looks like a mathematician. He does not look like a guy who. So Adam was interviewing him, and Adam's a comedian, but he loves cars, and he loves racing, and he knows, Adam races himself. He's getting ready to race the Paul Newman Porsche 935 that Paul won Le Mans with and took second overall in 1979. He's going to race that at Monterey this week.
Wow.
Historic.
So he's really into it.
Adam, he races all the time. And he asked Sebastian during the interview, he goes, "So Sebastian, what was it like growing up in Mexico?" And Sebastian's face, because he's just not, I don't think he's used to anyone giving him a hard time. And his face just went blank, because he's got that sort of that French accent. And he was, and then he realized, I think Adam was teasing him, but that was that was one of my kind of fun moments of behind the scenes. And I really enjoyed talking to Sebastian, and asking him questions about racing. I think because also I'm not, because I am not such a racing nerd, I probably get away with asking people questions that, they may answer questions from me. They may not be as apt to answer from other people.
Yeah, it's probably true. Probably true.
If you've not seen it, Google Sebastian Bourdais crash at Indy on pole day.
I've seen it.
And it's almost his come to Jesus moment and everything. How he survived that was remarkable. And he had been running in the Dale Coyne car fastest all month, so legitimate full contender that day. Tell us a little bit how you got associated with Adam and his racing career as well, if you would, Adam.
Sure. Like I said earlier, I produced a feature film that Adam wanted to make, a comedy about life on the road for a stand-up comedian. And then he found out that I had a background in making sports documentaries. And then we did the Newman doc. And after that, we just kept making docs. Because for Adam, he's kind of an enigma in terms of like, he knew there were a lot of stories in racing that needed to be told. And unlike, like the Newman doc and all these films, basically, he paid for them with his own money. We didn't have to go ask Netflix for money. He said, I want to make these because these stories need to be told. And even Willie's story, same thing. He was like, this story needs to be told. Like if people don't know this story, they need to know it,
Yeah.
And so we've just made them. And like the Aaron Shelby and the Shelby, Aaron Randall and Sean Shelby came in with us as partners on the Shelby documentary. But otherwise, Adam just, said, I want to tell these stories. And there probably needs to be more people like that because there's so many more great stories in racing that need to be told.
There really are.
But I mean, I was amazed no one had told Willie's story before. And Willie's like, I've been to everyone trying to get him to tell my story. And I was like, how could they not, he told me all the people who passed on the story. I was like, all those people should be ashamed of themselves.
Hey, Nate, let me ask you, have you seen many features on racing? I'm hoping you say all of them.
Pretty much, I would assume all of them. I really loved the Steve McQueen documentary that they made of them all, where they've had all that old footage. And I've seen the GT40 film car. That is very incredible they only had film cameras to shoot behind the scenes footage. So it looks amazing.
To my way of thinking, Le Mans was the best feature film on auto racing.
I loved that. Yeah, well, it was extraordinary. And they did, I shoot second unit action stuff on movies sometimes, and I do a lot of car stuff. And they were so far ahead of their time with, having a camera car and being able to mount a camera on a race car. And, they did a lot of really interesting stuff in that film. And I've watched it multiple times. And, because I am it may not have a lot of great story to it, but the movie it's incredible.
That's very pretty. There's you talk about mounts and everything for the features, especially. There's a guy out on your coast, Don Schumacher, that I think actually built the first car for mounting cameras and putting them on a racetrack. And,
right.
But you're right. Just the whole fact that they are able to do some of those things and get those perspectives, in television, we always were trying that, and we had the advantage of the smaller cameras and everything, but it's an art, and you really have to know in advance what the scene is going to be and then how you're going to interpret it. And then once you got that figured out, then I guess you place the cameras.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing car chases, or if you're going to have cars hit each other, or what I did the John Travolta movie Trading Paint. So I shot all the dirt track footage in Talladega, Alabama, at the dirt track there. All the B-roll. I didn't make, I wasn't responsible for the subject matter in the film, just what the races look like. And I did help them redo all the announcer dialogue so it sounded like a race. But
I have that on my watch list. I haven't watched it. I'll have to watch it now.
Yeah,
I know you were involved.
The racing stuff. Just look at the racing stuff. The story is not my cup of tea, but the racing stuff. We had cables on the track where we hooked up a cable camera that could come right at the cars, and we did for having a very limited budget, we did a lot of good stuff. And those drivers, I used actual dirt track drivers, because that's such a specialized form of racing that you can't train stuntmen to be anywhere near as good as those guys who've been racing on dirt their whole lives. Those guys, I got so comfortable with them that I was willing to, I put the camera on the track and I just let them spin the tail of the car right into the camera, because they could put
They
it
could do
3
it.
inches from the camera and they would never, ever miss. They were so accurate because they're so used to being an inch away from another car that it doesn't, they just knew exactly where every inch of their car was at all times.
Wow.
They were really precision drivers.
Let me take a poll then, since we both talked about Le Mans. What, and this is for all you guys, what was the worst film ever made about auto racing?
Uh,
Bob?
Driven, I think.
I was going to say Driven too.
I'd agree with you.
I think
and I-
Driven is the worst one I've ever.
I
think
have
that is- yeah.
I have a quick story about Driven. And I was hopefully going to show you a poster of Driven that I had here, but I couldn't make it work. The film, of course, was shown at Long Beach, at one of the Long Beach races, and everybody hated it. I mean, from their point, it's horrible. So they took it back and they did a big re-edit on it. And Rennie Harlan was the director. And I wanted to meet him just so I could meet his wife at the time. But, you know, but so they called 2 of us, myself and a guy named Larry Henry, to come out and voice some stuff for them. So we did, and that was pretty cool. But we're looking at this film in the revised version, and it's horrible. You know, you got a car going into the water, and it's like a nuclear explosion that would never happen. So when the film was finally done, the Indy Car community was in Texas and Denton for a race, and the movie was there. So the whole community went, and Parker Johnstone was my analyst at the time, and he went with me. And I'm sliding down in my chair because I do not want to be in the credits of this film. And I know I'm a SAG guy, so it was mandatory. And we get to the end, and thank God they didn't have a credit for me. Yay! But Parker, being the jokester he is, later as a Christmas present, made up with one of the posters for Driven, made it all up, and then it looked so real. Wrote featuring the voice of Paul Page. You know, I was like, Parker, I hate that film.
I'll tell you another weak one too, that's a classic because it shows Indy in its early years, is the silent film called Speedway, which is just so unrealistic, but it's great in that it captures what the early 20s at Indy looked like and everything. I got a question, since we're talking about
I've
Steve
tried to get
McQueen.
B-roll out of that movie.
I'm sorry.
I watched part of Speedway looking for B-roll from that era.
Right.
This is a spoiler alert, but in the future, we're going to probably do one on classic Indy 500 films, To Please a Lady, Winning, The Crowd Roars, Big Wheel with Mickey Rooney. And that will be a fun one to do. We won't spend a lot of time on Speedway though, other than that. Hey, going back to Steve McQueen, if you had to do a pecking order, and I'll get all 3 of yours opinion, might be unanimous too. Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, James Garner, I guess maybe throw in Dickie Smothers too. How you would rank 1 through 3, 1 through 4 as a race car driver. Would it be Newman first?
Yeah.
I would
think
put
so.
him first for sure, because every race car driver that I asked who raced against some of those guys, Garner and McQueen and Newman particularly, you know, everyone said when Newman started, he was horrible, like terrible, crashed and couldn't race well. But by the time he got into the professional Trans Am racing, he was a very, very good driver. And you know, one of my favorite quotes from John Morton was, "Hey, I didn't care that he was famous. I figured he'd already had a good enough life. I didn't want him to beat me in racing too." So, it's like he was already cool enough. Beating me in racing just made it worse. Not just a race car, but he said he was so good that, you know, sometimes he beat me.
Well,
And,
what was remarkable about Paul as well is the age he started at. Most
48.
guys are retiring when he started
Yeah,
racing.
48 years old.
Yeah, exactly. And
He was racing in the SCCA when I was doing the same thing, though not nearly as good as he did. But this was before cell phones, and he had a little trick that he used. I don't know if you got it for the film. He actually had the handset of a phone hanging off of his belt. And if somebody he'd see coming was going to, pester him or something, somebody he didn't know or whatever, he'd grab that phone, put it up to his ear and start talking.
That's funny.
I heard or read today that from Bruce Walkup that, of course, Paul Newman didn't like to have autographs. He'd wore a fake cast on his hand to get out of signing them, and when they were doing the film winning and everything. So,
He did not like signing.
Adam, Adam, I'm sorry, Nate. You've been to Indy 500, what, 2 times?
Twice.
Twice. What was your feel when you first went to the Speedway? Because this is what this show is mainly all about. This is a Indy 500 show, and all three of us just have a tremendous passion for it. What was it like never having been there and going your first time?
It was, I mean, listen, I probably had an experience like most people don't get to have. I, got escorted to the track, because the first time I went with Adam, got escorted to the track. We were on the grid right before the race, walking with the cars. Adam was in the 2-seater with Mario, and the same the second time I was on the grid. I got to walk with the cars, talk with some of the drivers that I knew. I'm just always amazed at how calm these guys are, and then they just, they're just calm. And I mean, I guess that's kind of how you got to do it. I've seen a lot of other professional athletes, same thing. But, and then get to sit in the pagoda and watch the race and be pretty much in the pits for the first couple laps. I'm always, for me, it's extraordinary, the speed and the efficiency that the pit crews. I enjoy watching a few pits as well, because those guys are incredible. But the racing itself it's really electric with the crowd. You don't really understand how cool it is to have that crowd until everybody's there, and everybody's just ready to race, and it's a once in a lifetime experience.
Here's another question then, certainly for me, and I'm assume for Paul and Bob, it would be unthinkable to miss an Indianapolis 500. It just would not even be something that would be allowed to happen. What caused you not to go back? Why didn't this turn out to be like a Swallows coming to Capistrano yearly, and you still can't?
There's a guy that works for me that goes every single year. Like I told you, he's not missed since 1991. It is his, Woodstock, call it whatever you want, but he goes, for me personally, I love it. It's exciting. I've seen Formula One races. I've seen NASCAR races. I've seen, all the different kinds of races. I was not a driver, so I don't have that touch that I want to feel what they're feeling and understand what they're understanding. And it's not, I like as far as cars and car racing and all that goes, it's always the story that attracts me. It's always the what, who, what, where, when, why, and how did this happen?
I'm going to suggest that you didn't really have, the way you came both times, the Indy experience. And you need to come back and come in like the fans do. Just be part of that giant crowd the night before across Georgetown Road and all over the North 40 and all that. And then you need to go sit in a stand. And I think that will capture you more than being up close and personal as it is. It's awesome.
Yeah, I go to Long Beach. I've been to, a lot of different races. Yeah, I mean, I would love to come and do it that way.
Give us a call. Give us a call.
I think it's a huge, it's a spectacle. It is,
Right.
it's a true spectacle.
Yeah, it's one of those things that's bigger than an auto race, to be quite honest.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like the Super Bowl is bigger than a NFL game.
Yep.
It's a happening, it's a spectacle, it's you attract people that never venture to an auto race besides the Indy 500 and never watch them on TV.
So there's your altar call there, Nate, for May of 2023. Now, I'm interested, I'm sure Paul and Bob are too, about the making of Uppity and any of the behind the scenes stuff that didn't get in the print and everything. Would you share some of that with us?
Sure. Uppity is probably my favorite film that I've made. I really think that on top of being a racing film, there's a lot of social context that film has that was very relevant for me. And, I have become very good personal friends with Willie. He makes me, he's just such a character. We've had a million hilarious conversations. I really love his son, Theo. When we interviewed Bernie Ecclestone for the documentary, Bernie is not a guy that grants a lot of interviews for documentaries. So
Right.
It was like getting Piero Ferrari in the 24-Hour War documentary. Piero Ferrari doesn't do a lot of documentary interviews, but Willie got Bernie. Like, I didn't get Bernie Ecclestone. Willie did. Willie, they knew each other because Willie had tested a car for him. And apparently Willie had helped him out with a few things during different times that I didn't know about. So I feel like Bernie felt like he owed Willie a favor. And he said, Willie and Theo were in London doing a shooting event because Theo, who is Willie T Ribbs' son, is one of the preeminent shooters in the world when it comes to skeet shotgun shooting.
Yeah, skeet shooting.
Yeah, sport clay shooting is what it is.
Yeah.
But he's one of the best in the world. So they were over there at an event, and so Willie was like, I got Bernie, we're doing it. So I was like, I'm flying over to England. Here we go. So we went over to England, and sure enough, we went to Bernie's office and he let us in. And, I was just amazed. Like, at that time he was 80 something, but he seemed like he was like 50. I mean, he was just, there was nothing that said 80-year-old man about him. And he was just an interesting guy. He was so sharp, and all of the, I wish I could have put more of what he said in the film, about Willie, and when Willie won the Formula Ford series in England, and, how much attention he did pay to Willie, and that, when Willie tested the Formula One car, he really was going to give him a shot in the 80s in Formula One.
Wow.
So he would have been the first, because he was fast enough. He said, look, he was fast enough to do it. When we tested him, he was fast enough.
Yeah.
And so, but Olivetti, who owned the car, they want Italian drivers. And he said they were the sponsors. They bought the car. I couldn't override them.
Right.
But it was really, it was really interesting stuff to hear from him,
As I mentioned, I watched that documentary as well, and I thought it was excellent. And I learned a lot more about Willie, naturally. I think I came away with more respect for his driving skill, which I didn't really know that much about, his climb up the ladder and all. And I think I realized, I knew he dealt with racism, but I think I realized how severe that was at the time. Maybe I didn't consider that in the past. So I thought it was a very good film.
Yeah, it's really hard to think and understand, I mean, I think back and I look at growing up in the 70s and 80s myself, I mean, I grew up in the Midwest in Montana, and just the sort of off the cuff racism that I saw every day. I can't imagine what he dealt with blue collar mechanics and people who they didn't want him anywhere near those cars. They didn't think he belonged there. They didn't believe he should be there. They just didn't want him in the sport. And he was the only, it wasn't like there was 5 other black guys that he could go hang out with.
Right.
He was the only one. There was nobody else. It wasn't like the NBA or the NFL or baseball where there's 8 black guys on your team, 10, whatever. He's the only guy.
Yeah.
There's no, let me go talk to Lewis Hamilton, because there was no Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
It was him.
Exactly.
So
he very definitely, I mean, he was a pathfinder. There had been a couple before him, but they didn't have Willie's sense of bravado, his outgoing personality and everything. And I think he was the one that got the most attention. And then, of course, after he did, then we'll see blacks running everywhere. And I think that's super.
Yeah, this is something that I touched on it in the film, and I talked to everybody about it, and it's something you guys would, this is an appropriate forum for it. But, even talking to Willie, like, because we did a whole tour and I've spoken with so many different African-American groups about the film and everything. And people are really angry about, like, why isn't there more blacks in racing now? And I'm like, listen, you need to understand how expensive it is to get into racing. It doesn't matter, and even Willie talked about it in the movies. Like, it didn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, whatever race you are, you need, Latino, you need money to race, like even start. So it's not, Willie was fortunate and he kind of went all in with his whole college money to go race in England. He's like, I'm taking every cent I have that I was supposed to use for college. But he came from a fairly affluent family that had some money so that he could race a little bit. And his dad was a fan of racing. His dad, Bunny, he was an amateur racer and he loved racing too. So that helped Willie to be able to get in there, and I don't think I used him in the film, but I interviewed Chase Austin, who knew Willie and was friends with him. And I think he's coming into he was in Indy Lights and now he's coming back into Indy, I think now, but same thing. He told me, like, look, I raced in dirt track and stuff as a kid because my dad would help me, and, even I looked at, like, I have 2 sons, one's 5, one's 8. And I thought, oh, maybe car racing would be fun to get them in go-karts or whatever, but you better have 50 grand to go get your kid into, you know what I mean? Yep. It's not like getting a soccer ball or a football or a baseball. My son's really good at baseball. That doesn't cost anywhere near what it would cost if you wanted to be in auto racing.
I think Juan Montoya's son is racing go-karts in Europe. And I was told that it cost him $25,000 a race a weekend to race go-karts.
Absolutely. That's what other people told me.
$25,000.
People here told me it was $10,000 a week or 5, if you want to be competitive. And I was like, ooh, I make documentaries. I didn't make Top Gun 2.
Yeah. Right.
Were you surprised that after he made the 1991 Indy 500 as a rookie that he didn't have a sustained career at Indy like many others? He had the talent to.
I was surprised he didn't get more sponsors, like going through, because I don't care what sponsors think of me. I was really unhappy, like, when I heard the whole story. So, of how difficult it was for him and Derek to get any money at all out of anybody to get that car in the race. And the thing, when you see the race, he has a McDonald's sticker. And to me, it's on his windscreen, but it looks like it's right. I'm like, how did you even see the track? It's like right on your, it's like right where you're look. I was like, they put it right where your face looks. I was like, it doesn't seem right to put that there, but they put it right on his, and he's like, they gave us like, I don't even remember how much it was, but it was it was like a tens of thousands of dollars. And I was like, that's all they gave you to put that on there in the race. They should be ashamed of themselves. And like for like Coca-Cola, who runs the Coca-Cola 500, to tell Bill Cosby that they couldn't sponsor Willie T Ribbs's car because they didn't really want to be in auto racing. You got to come up with a better excuse, Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
That's pathetic. I mean, I think, and I personally think some of those sponsors should have been held accountable for what they did of, you know, I think it's, you know, they should be ashamed for not wanting to, you know, now if it was today and he did what he did and it was that sort of heroic to qualify in that car that was barely drivable.
Yeah.
I mean, there would be 1,000 companies pounding his door down to get behind him, you know,
and Nate, you knew how good Derek Walker was. He was just as fine. Willie T Ribbs couldn't have had really much better than Derek Walker to have a car for him. I could almost go on record without Derek Walker, he probably wouldn't have made the 91 race.
No, and how much they all tried and gave up and sacrificed so that, you know, he blew 3 motors and two motors, 2 or 3, 2 motors. He blew 2 motors, I think. And then they had to give him basically a motor because they didn't have any more money.
That's one good thing about Indy Car today. You don't see the blowing engines like you once had in racing. Well, I want to move now to your other marquee documentary on Paul Newman, and we'll kind of conclude on that. You called it Winning as well. The movie that he starred in with Robert Wagner and Joanne Woodward was also called Winning. Was that the reason it was named that, first of all? And what were some of the stories or two that really stood out in your documentary on Paul Newman, Nate?
You know, that was a really enjoyable film to make. And, you know, Paul, like I said, I never was lucky enough to meet Paul, but I interviewed Robert Wagner. I interviewed, you know, his brother, lots of people who were very close friends of his, you know, Patrick Dempsey, who was a racer, was in there and friends with Paul, and Mario, who was lifelong friends with Paul, Mario Andretti, and Michael Andretti. You know, the thing that I walked away from that experience with is just what an incredible and humble human being that Paul Newman really was. I mean, he gave, at this point, $600 million to charity, you know, and, you know, he was such a kind of guy's guy about all of it. You know, he didn't want people to know that he was racing. He didn't want it in magazines, and he just wanted to go to the racetrack and race and enjoy himself. And he liked the car guys, you know, like one of our mechanics here who works on his cars used to race in the SCCAs with him. And he just loved coming and racing, you know, and our guy was like, I'd haul my car there on the same trailer and race it and put it right back on the trailer and leave, you know, no pit crew, no nothing. And Paul would just come over and ask me for a wrench or talk to me about my car. And he just wanted to talk about racing. If you start talking about Hollywood, he walks away. You know, he wants to talk about racing, cars, driving, you know, that was what he liked. And even when I interviewed Robert Redford for the movie, he said, I got frustrated. I'd call Paul and all he would talk to me about was racing. And he goes, I just couldn't take it anymore. Like, I just literally couldn't take it. Cause you know, and I mean, when I interviewed Robert Redford, we were in New York and he showed me photo. He was fixing a 1955 Spider with his son, like an original, which I would love. I don't know if he ever finished it, but I would love to see it. I have seen a few of those originals, and they're one of my favorite cars. But he's a car guy, but he still couldn't, he just couldn't understand why Paul was into it as deeply as he was. That was like he just ate, slept and drank racing, and that's what he loved.
Yeah.
Well, as a director, how did you like the movie Winning with Newman and Woodward and Wagner?
I enjoyed the movie. Again, like that's one of the first experiences where, they tried some, for that era, they tried some newer filming methods. They really worked on the car-to-car shooting. The story compared to contemporary films, it was what it was. I think Paul and Joanne, I was fortunate enough, Paul went and Bob Bondurant worked with him a lot on that film. So I was able to talk to Bob a lot about what he taught Paul and what kind of cars they drove for practice. And, when I interviewed Robert Wagner, he said, as soon as the director yelled cut, I jumped out of the car and ran away because I couldn't stand driving it anymore. Paul wanted to keep taking the car around the track, car around the track, car around the track, car around the track, and keep racing, because he was much more interested, I think, from my understanding, even with Arthur, he had been offered a bunch of movies that were much more lucrative for him, but he knew that at the age that he was at, that was probably about the last chance he was going to be even remotely believable as a race car driver. So he wanted to be a race car driver in a movie.
Well, Nate, we also have a fellow actor from that movie too, Paul Page. Want to tell about your acting experience in the movie Winning?
I got a couple of things about that. One is I was there. I wasn't in the credits because I was one of the crowd. But it was cool because every time they take a shot and want to change angles and everything, we as the crowd had to get up and move. So we'd be a background. There weren't that many of us. And I thought that was cool. Also, I think the entire company was Goodyear. And there was this like ongoing battle that nobody really knew about. The Goodyear guys would clean the tires all up so they'd show up great on camera. And then along would come the stage crew and they'd mess them all up and make them dirty. And that kept going back and forth. It wasn't a face-to-face, but sometimes Goodyear couldn't figure out how those tires get that dirty. That's nuts. And the first time that they wanted to shoot, the first time they wanted to shoot the Victory Lane scene with now the late Lou Palmer, we had a checkered carpet that was the thing, and that Victory Lane was, of course, down at the exit of the pits in those days. And so here comes Paul, and he's turning into Victory Lane and hits the brakes, and the carpet rolls up under the car. So it actually raised the car up a little bit. They had to go back and shoot it again. My all-time favorite is the production offered to the owner of the car, and it's sponsored by Rizlone. So they were really offering Rizlone to keep that, which was prominent on the side of that race car in the race, in the film, and that's the way it's done. And they turned them down. And I wonder if the guy that turned them down got fired right away, or how long it really took. Because that would have been magnificent.
Well, yeah, that's what I don't understand is you're giving, I've done a bunch of this stuff with product placement and, and even getting deals in movies, and like in the John Travolta movie, the Dirt Track movie, I got Hoosier Tires to give us tires.
Yeah.
So that, because those are the tires all those guys race on anyways, and they wanted to keep it consistent, so they gave us a bunch of practice tires because those guys burned. They told me like, that's the most expensive thing is tires for us. They burned through tire after tire, and it was true. Like so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that product placement stuff that I can understand where, Goodyear was paying for their name to be on screen, and, I don't know why anyone would not want it on there.
Exactly.
Well, at the end of the movie, Bobby Unser does a cameo role where he congratulates Paul Newman for winning the race. we'll let the guru of Bobby Unser. What did Bobby ever talk to you about that movie? Paul?
Oh, of course. and he should have been the star, according to Bobby. But yeah, of course, that was the car that Bobby won the 500 in. The production used that 500 and shot all of it, and then used that race as part of the film. And so the caveat, the offer to Bobby was, look, we're going to let you in that scene. You can shake hands. You're going to be part of the scene. And I think he thought it was going to be a lot more than it ended up on the screen, which is, of course, what everybody thinks. But he didn't have what you would call fond memories of that particular film, because, well, yeah, you got this Paul Newman guy. I'm a lot prettier than that.
Yeah, Bobby. So I did a 3-hour interview with Bobby.
Oh my God.
Because I knew, like, a lot of these guys, when I interview them, I just know that, they're not going to be around, and
why did you do such a short interview with him? That's why.
I'm glad that I did a long interview with him, because now
that sounds like a 2-question interview when it's Bobby.
Yeah. Well, Bobby I'm sure you guys know very well, he pulls no punches, and he was hysterical. I mean, my favorite, I put some of my favorite lines in Uppity, where he was like, well, we had a race every Friday night. Then we'd have a fight right after the race. And it wasn't a race if you didn't have a fight. And like
everybody does a Bobby imitation.
Right.
It's great.
I mean,
pretty good ones.
Just the way that he was, I just loved sort of how candid he was.
I called him one Saturday morning. I was working on the Troy Ruckman book, and I just really had a couple of questions. And I thought, okay, this is Bobby. Instead of 2 minutes, it'll take 15 or 20. Well, almost 2 hours later, I was still, was still on the phone with Bobby and talking about everything in the world. Had an opinion about everything, no matter what the subject was. Entertaining guy, though.
So Paul Newman, eventually in 1983, with Carl Haas, Greats, Newman Haas was probably the second most dominant race team other than Penske. They wind up winning 107 Indy Car Champ Car races. They came in 1983. But kind of the sad thing is, though, as good as they were, they never won Indy. Mario got second. Michael got second. Nigel Mansell ran third, but and dominated many times. I mean, 1987, that was so dominant, and he breaks late, and Al Unser has really gifted his fourth win on that. Probably the one that was the most famous was 85. Paul, where were you when you were there? Were you able, from your standpoint, to see the spin by Danny Sullivan?
Only through the TV monitor that I had. I was in the control tower over the start-finish line, and that happened between turn 1 and 2. But I saw it come up on the monitor, and I called the first part of it, and because I couldn't figure out whether the turn 1 announcer or the turn 2 announcer ought to be all over it. And finally, I just threw it, and he was still spinning when the announcer picked it up. But oh my goodness! And then again, Lou Palmer in the winner's circle after Danny won that race, he was the one that created the spin and win as what later became, just like the thing about that film. It was the spin and win.
And Mario was pretty dominant in the early stages of that too. It was his not to win that day, but that one got away. Michael in 1992 had one and was leading with Bob. How many laps? 8 or 10 to go, and he broke, and that gave Al Jr. his first win.
Yes.
But,
there's, if I may, Denny, there's a couple of Paul Newman things I'd like to mention.
Please.
One of them is we've talked about how he kind of shies away from a crowd. He wants to do his racing. But we were at Laguna Seca one year, and I had my daughter Marlo, who was 13 or 14 at the time, with me. And we're going back in between the coaches to head back to the television compound. And here comes Paul. And he's in his full star mode. Oh, who is this wonderful lady? And he invites her up into the coach. He serves her Coca-Cola and talks to her and everything. Maybe only 5 minutes, but it was so nice. And I was really thankful that he did that. Except that when we left the coach and we're walking along, my daughter said, "Who was that?" So it's age.
What is,
Right.
does she
A
know
different
now who that
generation.
was?
What I always wondered too, I'm sorry, Nick.
Oh, no, what does she think now about who that was?
Oh, she's pretty embarrassed when I tell that story. Yeah, I'm very embarrassed. There was another Newman thing, and I think I've already forgotten it. I had so much fun with that story. No, the thing was that Carl Haas was not what you would call an overly communicative guy.
No.
Neither was Paul, for that matter.
Mm-mm.
And they played backgammon in the tent alongside their trailer, and they'd never talk. And Carl would even, during the race, every lap he'd write something on a pad of paper he had. And I always wondered what it was like getting in a conversation and listening to a conversation with those two, because they were both pretty non-communicative when it came to just sitting around.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting. I was really bummed out that we couldn't interview Carl for the film.
Yeah.
At that point, they just said that wasn't going to work out already. I mean, the one thing that I really loved that maybe not a lot of people knew, I really loved all of the shenanigans and private, and practical jokes that he pulled on people, and that people pulled on him.
Yep.
We've got 3 of his 4 national championship cars here. And we have the Bob Tullius Triumph here that was painted in Bob Tullius green, and then Adam bought it and painted it right back to Paul Newman gray and black as soon as he got it. But Bob Tullius and Paul famously, used to play jokes on each other. I think Paul painted a garbage truck in his livery and drove it around the track, out to the track. And then Bob Tullius had a he just went and found a tour bus of elderly people and said that they were going on a Paul Newman tour, and took them right to the trailer because he didn't like having people go there, but he took them right to his trailer on the track, let them all out and go to his trailer. Yeah. And then I guess he came out and signed autographs, and it was really nice. And
Wonderful stories.
They all had t-shirts that said Paul Newman Fan Club. I saw some photos from it. He gave them all t-shirts that said Paul Newman Fan Club.
Well, Nate, wow. You got a couple of marquee people you're considering documentaries, Dan Gurney and Bobby Rahal.
Yeah, we're working on those right now. Those are in the works. So we're closer to finishing the Dan Gurney documentary. But we've been, the Bobby one is really interesting because, Dan has passed already. And Bobby's current team owner. So we're sort of interspersing his current life as an owner with the history of him as a driver.
And his son too.
Yeah, and Graham, of course, Graham drives for him. So that's all part of the story as well. And so that's that one, it's, as a filmmaker, it's a little more dynamic for me because it's not just a straightforward documentary about, a Carroll Shelby or a Dan Gurney who may, I did have a very substantial interview with Dan before he passed away. So I do have that as the backbone for our film, but the Bobby Rahal one, because he's a current owner and he's got so much racing going on, having that sort of live action stuff right now makes it a little more like Drive to Survive, and it's a little more.
And a former Indy 500 winner too. Well, Nate, did you have a good time?
I had a great time with you guys. Thank you so much.
Hopefully you want to come back again. And we always kind of conclude looking ahead. And this coming weekend is at Gateway outside of St. Louis. And the battle, Nate, if you haven't been keeping in touch with this, is just incredibly close. Will Power, who won the 2018 Indy 500, leads with 450 points. Scott Dixon, the 2008 winner's got 444. This year's winner, Marcus Ericsson, is at 438. Josef Newgarden is 428. Alex Palou, the defending champion, 417. And a couple, if they get hot, could still win it. Scott McLaughlin in the Penske with 392 and Patou Award at 391. Final thoughts, Bob, as you look ahead to St. Louis?
I think Scott McLaughlin is really coming on strong. He's won what, 3 races this year, 3 races, has some strong finishes, been very impressive his last few races. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him really do well at St. Louis, and then, you know, really be in contention for the championship right down to the last race or two.
Paul?
I'm looking at Will Power. Will has done such a marvelous year and been consistent. He's been there. He got maybe 2 bad breaks, but I'd like to see him take the championship. I think that'd be cool. By the way, I'm not going to charge anybody for this, but Denny, you write the script, and then Nate, you do the documentary, and it is a first person of a fan coming to the Indy 500, camping out in the north and everything. I'm telling you, it's a winner. It is definitely a winner.
And Bob will take you to Charlie Brown's and send you. Oh,
Yeah.
by the way, I'm very sorry, my dear friend. The lightning and thunder are going to strike. This show is dedicated to the memory of Robin Miller.
Yeah.
And every week there is a special thing for Robin. I won't say too much about it, but we keep his memory alive. And
a few weeks ago, you mentioned Charlie Brown's. We do that every Friday for lunch. A few months ago, I shouldn't say weeks, but Willie T Ribbs walks in.
Yeah,
Charlie Brown's, and he said he was just passing by and remembered we all got together for lunch on Friday, so thought he'd drop in. And of course, he was the star of the show from that point on.
And we'll take you around and show you the places that most people don't know where to go to, that makes Indy Indy.
Well, we loved, what's the place that everybody goes for dinner? The steak place?
St. Elmo's.
St. Elmo's.
Yeah, we loved that place.
Yeah.
And Adam and I both had a ball there.
Yeah, I bet.
It'll work perfectly in the documentary. And you could film Bob and I eating there. How's that?
Mhm.
That sounds terrific.
And Paul will give you the check.
Exactly.
It's
I
usually
learned
how it
that from
works.
Bobby.
Yeah.
No, there's other places too. We like going to a place that's called Iron Skillet that has a down home type cooking in this kind of historic home. Right across the street is Wilbur Shaw Soapbox Derby Hill, and down the street was the famous Riverside Amusement Park. So you come, stay a week or so, Nate, and you'll have a great time. So this has been a fun show. Nate, thank you for coming. So from Speedway Insiders Paul Page and Bob Gates, this is Denny Miller saying thank you, and we'll see you next week after the St. Louis race, and Godspeed.